Her manicured finger hovered just inches away from the ceremonial rifle. The world seemed to freeze. A hush fell over the rows of white headstones, as if even the fallen held their breath. The Chinese tourist in the scarlet designer suit smirked, her sunglasses catching the summer sun. "Fake hero," she sneered, voice sharp as a blade. The honor guard did not flinch, but something changed in his steely eyes, a spark, an unspoken warning. Tension crackled like a storm waiting to break. In that split second, everyone wondered, would tradition triumph or would arrogance finally cross a line no one dared to breach? Welcome to the Honor Guard, where every story salutes courage, sacrifice, and honor. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? If you believe in honoring those who served, hit that subscribe button to stand with us. And remember, tomorrow will bring you another powerful story to keep the flame of respect alive. Arlington National Cemetery lay silent, dignified under the soft morning light. A faint breeze rustled the flags posted beside endless rows of white markers, each one etched with a name, a rank, a date that had left a family forever changed. Here the cost of freedom was written plainly in stone. Among the visitors was Walter, a veteran well into his 80s with a slow limp and a chest weighed down by medals whose colors had faded with time. He came here every year on the same date to honor friends who had never made it home. There was a certain peace in this place, a reverent hush, as if the earth itself refused to let disrespect cross its gates. But that peace was about to be shattered. Walter noticed her the moment she arrived. It was impossible not to, a woman dressed head to toe in a bold red suit that nearly glared against the marble white headstones. Tall, immaculately groomed with sunglasses that hid any trace of humility. Even her walk was different, brisk, defiant, more a statement than a simple act of movement. She didn't pause to bow her head. She didn't even slow her stride. Instead, she raised her phone, immediately filming everything and everyone as though she owned the place. A swirl of expensive perfume trailed behind her, somehow wrong in the sacred air. Walter narrowed his eyes. He had seen disrespect before, but this was something else. There was no reverence, no quiet, only a pointed, gleaming arrogance that seemed designed to provoke. Near the tomb of the unknown soldier, the honor guard stood immovable, a white uniform pillar of resolve. The Marine was young, maybe mid-20s, yet bore the expression of someone who carried centuries of tradition on his shoulders. Rifle balanced, eyes forward, posture perfect. He seemed to exist beyond the petty noise of the living. But the woman didn't see that, or refused to see it. She planted herself right in front of his cell phone, high filming close enough that Walter could see the trembling reflection of the honor guard in her screen. "This is what you Americans call a hero," she spat, her voice cutting the air. "A man who just stands there. How much do they pay you to play statue?" Walter's knuckles whitened on his cane. The disrespect was painful to watch, but he knew the rule: never interfere. Let the honor guard do their job. A few passers-by slowed, glancing nervously at the confrontation. Nobody quite knew what to say. The woman stepped closer, ignoring the small cordon that was meant to keep tourists at a respectful distance. She was now within arm's reach of the young Marine, practically breathing the same air. The honor guard did not move. That was the code: total discipline, total focus. Only in the rarest circumstances could he break silence. "Look at me," she demanded. "Are you deaf or are you a fake hero?" "That's what you are, right, fake, just for show." Her tone dripped with contempt, a scorn so thick it felt like an insult to every name carved in the rows behind him. Walter wanted to shout, to step forward and defend the Marine, but he stayed rooted just like the others. Then in one casual, devastating gesture, the woman reached out with her perfectly manicured hand. Slowly, arrogantly, she extended a single finger, as if to poke the ceremonial rifle itself. Walter's heart leapt into his throat. No one touched the weapon. Ever. That rifle represented not just discipline, but sacrifice, history, the very promise to stand between peace and chaos. Time seemed to slow. The finger hovered closer, closer, barely an inch from contact. And that was the moment the world seemed to crack, as if an ancient law had just been broken. The finger inched closer, almost grazing the polished metal of the ceremonial rifle. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd. Even the breeze seemed to halt, unwilling to disturb the sacred line about to be crossed. The honor guard did not blink, did not flinch. But in his eyes, a shift almost invisible signaled a line of defense drawn deeper than flesh and bone. This was a line of spirit, of sacred duty. The woman, emboldened by the silence, leaned even further. Her sunglasses reflected the white of his dress uniform, as if mocking it. "Come on," she hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Say something. Do something. Or are you really just a dumb puppet in a pretty suit?" Walter could feel the tension in the air, coiling tight as barbed wire. He gripped his cane so hard it dug into the leather of his hand. Every muscle in his frail old frame told him to march forward to defend this young Marine, as he would have defended any brother in arms. But he stayed still. It was their code. The honor guard must be allowed to stand their ground in their own way. Tourists nearby began pulling out their phones, recording what was quickly spiraling into something far beyond a disrespectful comment. The woman waved her own camera, still filming like a sword. "Look at this, everyone," she crowed into her live stream. "American hero, he can't even talk back. He just stands there like a fool." The hurtful laughter that followed stabbed deeper than any knife. The honor guard remained silent, breathing steady, his jaw locked in place. He was trained for this, for weathering storms of insult, for ignoring the living in service of the dead. His mission was to honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. But then she crossed the last line. With an arrogant flick of her finger, she tapped the barrel of his rifle. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. A mother with two small children shielded their eyes, as if the moment was too shameful to bear. Walter's stomach turned. He had seen men shot in the war for less than what she had just done. For the honor guard, the tap was no ordinary contact. It was a violation, an intrusion, a mocking of the centuries of tradition he had sworn to uphold. The soldier's next move was lightning quick, so fast it stunned the woman into frozen shock. He shifted his rifle with a precision so sharp it nearly sliced the air, blocking her hand, and stepping forward in a single seamless maneuver drilled into him countless times. His voice rang out crisp and unyielding. "Stand back." The command echoed across the stones, a thunderclap in the calm morning. The woman actually flinched, stumbling backward. The screen of her phone shook wildly, as her live stream audience must have watched in confusion and awe. For the first time since she arrived, a hint of uncertainty cracked her flawless confidence. "What did you say to me?" she barked, regaining her footing. The honor guard didn't respond. He had returned to his statuesque posture, one step forward, now his body subtly shielding the rifle from further insult. A chill seemed to run through the onlookers. They knew what that step meant, a final warning. But the woman was not finished. Her pride burned far too brightly to let her back down. She sneered, her red lips curling. "Is that all you can do? Yell at me. You think you scare me?" She took another step forward, reckless, hungry for another reaction. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, silently praying for patience for the Marine, for the woman, for everyone there who had come only to pay respect. But there would be no more patience. The honor guard shifted again, ever so slightly, placing his free hand closer to the sling of the rifle. A silent signal that the next violation would meet with the full authority granted to him by tradition, law, and sacred duty. "Do not approach." His words, measured and loud, were as final as a judge's gavel. A group of other visitors began to murmur, some supporting him, some unsure. But no one stepped forward. The woman now stood in a bubble of tension, so tight it could break with a whisper. Her expression twisted with rage. "You think you can threaten me in front of the whole world?" she shouted into her phone. "Look, everyone, this is how they treat visitors. This is how they treat me." The phone camera swung wildly, capturing half the tomb, half the honor guard's face. Walter, with his veteran's eyes, recognized the subtle tremor in the Marine's shoulders. Not from fear, from iron-willed control. The kind of control that takes years to master and a lifetime to defend. The woman tried to push forward again, raising her hand for a second slap at the rifle. But she hesitated. The honor guard did not move yet, somehow made the space between them feel insurmountable. In that pause, a single truth finally reached her. Through the wall of arrogance, she would not win this standoff. But her pride could not accept it. "You are all the same," she spat, backing away a single step. "Fake. All of you." She was shaking, though she tried to hide it behind her sunglasses. And then, in a last act of open humiliation, she pointed to the rows of headstones and laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "All these graves for fake heroes? You people make me sick." A silence fell like a hammer. Walter's heart broke. The honor guard, rigid and unyielding, did not reply. He simply stood holding the line as hundreds of fallen souls watched from the other side of eternity. The woman's voice cut through the stunned quiet one last time. "Maybe you're too scared to move because you know I'm right." A ripple of anger moved through the watching crowd. Someone whispered, "Enough!" But it wasn't enough, not yet. She lifted her phone again, ready for another strike of shame, oblivious that her next step would tip her past every line of human decency left. The moment her hand lifted again, the honor guard drew a deep, steady breath, the kind that signaled something irrevocable was about to happen. The air grew heavy, nearly humming with a force older than anyone's soldier, the weight of centuries of sacrifice of duty carried on shoulders far stronger than his alone. Walter felt a chill run through him. He'd seen that look before, the locked, unbreakable calm of a man trained to stand between peace and chaos no matter what. The woman advanced one more step, bringing her phone within inches of the Marine's decorated chest. Her voice climbed into a shrill, mocking chant. "Tell me, say something. You think you can scare me with your little toy gun?" She thrust her finger forward so close to his medals she could have wiped them off. That was it. Like a blade slicing through the tension, the honor guard moved. A practiced, powerful pivot shifted his rifle from ceremonial rest to a ready block, interposing the polished steel squarely between the woman and his uniform. In that same instant, he took a single, forceful step forward, boots pounding the stone as if to anchor history itself behind him. "Stand back." The command rolled through the marble and granite like a cannon blast. Even the birds nesting in the old trees startled into flight. The woman recoiled, so shocked she nearly dropped her phone. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "Do you know who I am?" He did not answer. He had no need to. His posture was answer enough, a living wall, a man who would rather be cut down than allow 1 inch of dishonor to touch the ground he guarded. She tried to rally herself, dragging her pride back up from its bruised place. "You can't treat me like this. You're nothing, just a servant. You stand there like a mannequin." He did not blink. Somewhere behind the woman, Walter saw a father pulling his son closer, whispering in his ear. The boy, no older than 10, looked confused and afraid. The father shook his head, trying to explain a lesson the boy would never forget, that some things once crossed can never be undone. The woman's breathing was ragged now. The cell phone in her hands still broadcast the entire scene to thousands of unseen strangers, but her moment of triumph was curdling fast. She lashed out one last time. "Answer me! I demand you answer me!" She moved forward to push against the rifle again, and in a single motion, the honor guard executed a flawless rifle manual, twisting the barrel sideways in a controlled movement that forced her hand away without striking her. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose, and for the first time the honor guard could see her eyes wide, startled, full of disbelief that her intimidation had met such steely defiance. The crowd at last began to murmur approval. A man in the back muttered, "Damn right." The honor guard's voice rang out a final time, low and implacable. "Do not approach. Move away from the line." The woman's face flushed crimson, whether from shame or rage, no one could say. She looked around, searching for support in the faces of the onlookers, but found none. They were done with her. The spell of arrogance broke. For a heartbeat she stood there, the illusion of her power crumbling under the immovable presence of one man and the thousands he symbolized. Then humiliatingly she stumbled backward, nearly tripping on the marble steps. Her phone finally fell from her hand, clattering on the stone with a thin, pathetic sound. The honor guard never moved to help her pick it up. That was not his place, not his mission. He simply returned to his post, resetting his stance with absolute precision, eyes forward once more. The moment seemed to seal shut around him like a steel vault, as if the interruption had never occurred. The woman stood frozen. Walter watched her with a heavy heart. He had fought in places where soldiers had died for a handshake, for a folded flag, for a moment of silent thanks. Seeing her spit on that sacred ground was more painful than any wound. Around them, the cemetery seemed to breathe again. The flags rustled, the breeze returned, and for a moment even the sun seemed to break through the clouds above, shining onto the rifle's polished metal. It was then that the honor guard spoke again, softer now, but still thunder in its certainty. "Respect this place." The woman swallowed, hard eyes darting around. For a sympathetic face there were none. The people who had gathered were no longer bystanders. They were witnesses. They were guardians of memory just as much as the Marine was. She turned to leave, but even that motion seemed defeated, her back-hunched shoulders drawn tight, no longer the towering figure she'd flaunted. Walter let out a long breath, as if releasing years of buried rage on behalf of every brother lost. He stepped closer, his old legs shaky but strong enough to carry him forward. "You should remember," he told her, his voice a quiet rasp. "Those men behind him died so you could even stand here and run your mouth. Don't forget that." The woman glanced at him, face pale, lips pressed tight, then fled. A hush fell over the crowd, settling like a respectful blanket around the graves once more. The honor guard resumed his slow, deliberate pacing. His boots, timed to perfection, echoed across the hallowed ground, reminding everyone that even after insult, even after humiliation, the line of honor would stand, no matter who tried to break it. For a long moment after the woman had stumbled away, the hush over Arlington felt almost holy. The breeze carried with it a collective exhale, as if the earth itself had been waiting to see whether the honor guard would hold the line. Walter stood rooted in place, watching the Marine resume his watch. Each precisely timed step rang like a silent vow, a living testament to centuries of sacrifice. Somewhere beyond the cordon, a child spoke, his voice cutting through the stillness with the honesty only children could offer. "Daddy," he asked, "why didn't the soldier just yell at her more? Or push her?" The father bent down, voice low and full of pride. "Because, son, that's not what honor looks like. That's what strength looks like." The boy nodded solemnly, as if absorbing a lesson far bigger than textbooks could ever teach. Other visitors quietly filtered back into their own thoughts, a few shaking their heads in disbelief at the audacity they just witnessed. More than one person approached Walter, as though the old veteran might have an explanation for what had happened. But Walter only said he did what he was trained to do, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the honor guard had returned to his silent, precise pace. His rifle, now held a shade more firmly, caught the sunlight on its polished barrel, a bright flash that seemed almost like a second salute. One woman in the back, misty-eyed, whispered to her husband, "I'll never forget that." The husband nodded, jaw set, voice rough, "Neither will I." Near the edges of the crowd, a group of security officers conferred in hushed tones. Two of them jogged after the tourist, whose self-righteous ranting could still be faintly heard echoing beyond the rows of marble. "Disrespecting the tomb," one of the guards muttered. "Some nerve." "Some ignorance," the other replied. Walter turned away from them, focusing instead on the soldier. Something about that young Marine's bearing reminded him of the boys he'd fought beside so long ago, boys who had learned the same lesson of unbreakable resolve under fire. His mind drifted unbidden to a battlefield far from these peaceful graves. He remembered a friend name chiseled on one of these stones now, who had refused to leave his position even when all seemed lost. That same fierce loyalty burned in the honor guard's eyes today, refusing to yield to arrogance. The distant voice of the woman echoed again, angry and shrill. But the Marine paid it. No mind did not even flinch. Walter stepped closer to the white cordon, studying the young man's face. Stoic, yes, but there was a depth there, a determination that went beyond ritual. In that moment, Walter understood something perfectly. It was not only discipline that kept the soldier rooted, it was love. Love of country, love of fallen comrades, love of the promise that freedom would stand no matter who tried to tear it down. A new wave of visitors arrived, some catching only the tail end of the tension, curious why so many still stood silently watching a lone Marine walk his measured path. A middle-aged man explained it to them in a reverent hush. Lady tried to humiliate him, he said, but he stood his ground. He stood for all of them. He pointed across the endless rows of headstones. An older woman placed a hand over her heart. God bless him, she said, her voice breaking. The honor guard continued, the only sound in the world for a moment being the click of his heels on the stone, a rhythm older than any one visitor. Somewhere beyond the ceremonial gate, the woman was still protesting, demanding her phone back, blaming American cruelty for her embarrassment. But no one rushed to help her now. Her moment of control had collapsed, revealed for the shallow, brittle pride it was. A security officer stepped in front of her, calm but unyielding. Ma'am, he said firmly, this is hallowed ground. You have been asked to leave. You will leave. She sputtered, threatened lawsuits, demanded apologies, but no one budged. Back inside the cordoned area, Walter felt tears sting his tired eyes. So many years of trying to explain why respect mattered, why duty was sacred, and here was one young Marine showing it all without saying another word. He turned to a woman beside him, a stranger who had tears streaking down her own cheeks. He's a better man than most politicians, Walter said softly. She gave a wet laugh, nodding hard. A better man than most people. Walter glanced back at the Marine, who had resumed his silent pacing, as though nothing had happened, as though no one had tried to drag his honor through the mud, as though thousands of ghosts were still depending on him to guard their sleep. He raised his cane in a silent salute. The young honor guard did not acknowledge him, could not by rules and discipline, but Walter imagined that somehow, deep in that soldier's mind, he would feel the presence of every soul who'd ever worn the uniform standing behind him. And so the ceremony continued. Boots met stone. Breath matched precision. The line held. No matter what storms blew through the world beyond these white markers, no matter how many voices tried to belittle sacrifice, the honor guard would stand. One visitor summed it up best as he walked away, phone still filming. This is what respect looks like, right here, remember that. The woman's protests faded behind them, growing more pathetic and small with each echo, until finally all that was left was silence again, a silence heavy with meaning. The honor guard took one more measured step and then another. The world moved on, but the line never moved. The angry shriek of the woman grew fainter and fainter until the sound of her voice seemed to fade into nothing, leaving only the rhythmic echo of the honor guard's boots to fill the air. The quiet returned to Arlington like a blanket carefully smoothed over an old wound, dignified and final. Walter took a slow breath. Even though his bones ached, he refused to leave yet. Something inside him demanded to stay to witness the aftermath of the insult, to watch how a true guardian preserved honor not with violence, but with unshakable resolve. He shuffled closer, resting against the cool marble of a nearby pillar. Other visitors lingered as well, their conversations hushed, their faces serious. Did you see that? Someone whispered. He never even flinched, another answered, almost in awe. A small group of children had gathered near Walter, clutching little American flags in their hands. Their parents pulled them close as if to shield them from the ugliness of what had happened, but at the same time wanting them to remember. The children stared at the Marine with wide, solemn eyes, and for a moment Walter saw those young eyes fill with something he recognized: respect. And then the honor guard resumed his steady pace as if nothing had ever broken the flow. He stepped, turned, waited, turned again, a living metronome of duty. Far beyond the cordon, the woman was being escorted toward the cemetery gates by security staff. Her once perfect hair was tangled, her sunglasses missing her face, blotchy with frustrated tears. The phone, which had been her weapon, her badge of superiority, had been handed back to her. Its screen cracked where it had struck the marble. She clutched it like a lifeline, spinning wild stories to the staff. "They assaulted me," she screamed, voice cracking. "I will have your jobs for this. You have no idea who I am." The guard in front of her did not even blink. "Ma'am," he replied with a calm that bordered on holy, "you are free to file a complaint outside the sacred ground, but you will leave now." Her protest went unanswered as two security officers gently, firmly guided her toward the exit. The gathered crowd parted wordlessly, refusing to meet her gaze, refusing to share in her shame. Walter could see in her posture and the stiff lines of her shoulders that something had broken inside her, something about the way she thought the world worked. Pride is an easy cloak to wear until it's ripped away in front of hundreds of watching eyes. She staggered beyond the gates, her voice still spitting insults, but softer now and somehow emptier. Inside, Arlington exhaled. Visitors began to resume their quiet, respectful walks among the graves, reading names etched into the stone-laying flowers, praying in silence, as if the interruption had been a passing thunderstorm, and now the sun could shine again. Walter tapped the head of his cane against the ground once to steady himself. He stepped forward closer to the honor guard, and though he knew there could be no answer, he spoke anyway. "Proud of you, son," he rasped, "real proud." The Marine did not move, did not react. His eyes stared straight ahead, but Walter liked to think just for a moment that the words made it through. Behind Walter, a family gathered around a small headstone, kneeling. A woman pressed her hand to the marble and sobbed softly. Her husband put an arm around her, eyes red. They had been there earlier, forced to witness the disrespect, and now they too had returned to the sacred rhythm of mourning. Walter watched them. He remembered how it felt to lose brothers, how it felt to come home carrying medals but leaving behind a piece of your soul. He watched the honor guards stand unwavering and knew that was exactly why these men trained so hard to protect the ones who still needed space to cry, to remember, to heal. No one would steal that dignity. A mother walked by holding the hand of a small girl with pigtails. The child looked up at the honor guard with wide eyes. "Mommy," she asked, "why didn't he yell back at that lady?" Her mother paused, bending to answer in a voice as gentle as the wind. "Because he was brave enough not to," she said. The girl nodded, though she probably only half understood, and the mother squeezed her hand with a quiet pride. Beyond the crowd, Walter could see security radioing and reporting the incident. No charges would be filed. There was no physical harm, no real violence. But the consequence was clear: she had been exiled from a place where the highest price of freedom was honored. That alone was punishment enough. Walter looked around one last time. The sun was climbing higher and the heat pressed against his shoulders. But he stayed rooted to the marble eyes locked on the honor guard, as if the young Marine carried every name, every sacrifice in his perfectly measured steps. He thought of his own friends' names chiseled in rows of letters that blurred when tears came too fast. They had fought so no one would dare spit on their graves, and so no one would dare mock the soldiers who stood over them. Today that mission had been fulfilled. The woman's echoing insults had died somewhere outside the cemetery walls. Inside, the only voice that mattered was the steady rhythm of boots and rifle, the sacred watch that would never be broken. For as long as America stood, Walter thought there would always be someone willing to hold that line. And maybe that was the lesson she had learned in the most humiliating way possible. Honor could not be bought, respect could not be demanded, and neither would ever bow to arrogance. The echoes of the woman's shrill protests were gone, now fading like a bad dream left outside the cemetery gates. In their place was the hush that belonged here, the hush of memory of unspoken prayers of peace, hard-won and dearly kept. The honor guard continued his ritual without a single hesitation, a human monument of discipline and purpose. Step, turn, pause, turn again. The same moves that had been practiced for generations, each precisely measured, each a vow in motion. Walter watched him with quiet admiration. He had served long ago in places no tourist would ever understand and had witnessed men break under far lesser insults. This young Marine, though, had held steady through a storm of hate that might have shattered even seasoned soldiers. It gave Walter hope. He shifted slightly on his cane knees, stiff from age, but his heart steady. Around him, the families and visitors had resumed their grieving, their moments of reflection, as if the land itself refused to let one woman's arrogance define the day. A group of middle school students arrived with their teacher, chattering at first until they saw the rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon. Their voices fell to whispers, eyes wide. The teacher knelt down and spoke softly. "Do you see him?" she asked, pointing to the honor guard. "He's there to remind you that freedom has a price." One of the kids raised a timid hand. "Why do they stand so still?" The teacher smiled, a gentle sadness in her eyes. "Because they're standing for those who can't." The students fell silent, watching the Marine with a mix of wonder and respect, and Walter felt a warmth spread through his chest. Maybe the next generation would carry forward these lessons. Maybe the world wasn't so lost after all. A light breeze stirred the flags around the plaza, their red, white, and blue unfurling proudly against the pale blue sky. That ripple of color reminded Walter of the men who had carried those colors forward on foreign battlefields, and the men who had died to keep them flying. It reminded him that freedom was never quiet. It had always demanded sacrifice. But once that sacrifice was made, the silence that followed was sacred. The honor guard, still steady, seemed to be a bridge between those two worlds, the chaos of conflict and the calm of peace. Walter turned slightly and saw a young couple standing arm in arm, tears on their cheeks. They were reading the inscription on one grave, running their fingers over the engraved name. The woman wiped her eyes. "He was only 19, she whispered. Her partner hugged her closer. "He was braver than anyone we know." That was the truth of this place, Walter thought. Bravery wasn't always about charging forward, rifles blazing. Sometimes it was about standing still, standing firm, refusing to be moved by ignorance or hate. His gaze returned to the honor guard. No tremor in those hands, no fear in those eyes, only resolve. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear a faint bugle call taps played at another funeral in a different section of the cemetery. The notes drifted through the air, haunting and pure, weaving their way through the columns of white headstones. It was a song that had followed Walter all his life, from the first funeral of a fallen brother until now, when so many years had passed, he had lost count. And yet it still made his chest tighten. The children heard it too, and stood stock still, eyes, big hands by their sides. The teacher placed a finger to her lips, and the entire group fell silent. As the last note of taps faded, the wind seemed to answer with a hush so perfect it was as if the world itself bowed. Walter felt tears gather in his eyes. A visitor nearby sniffled, trying to keep composure. "It always gets me," he whispered. "Me too," Walter replied softly. They shared a quiet moment, strangers bound by a shared reverence. In that moment, Walter wished the woman who had tried to belittle the honor guard could have heard this silence, this perfect, powerful silence, and understood what it meant. The young Marine took another step, eyes fixed ahead, boots crisp on the marble. His back was straight, his breathing even unbroken by the confrontation he had endured. Walter knew it was because of his training, but also because of something deeper: belief. Belief that no insult could outweigh the memory of those who had fallen. Belief that no single voice could drown out the chorus of gratitude that echoed through these sacred stones. The silence of Arlington was its own language, spoken without a single word understood by any heart willing to listen. Walter stood there a while longer, breathing it in, letting it settle deep into his bones. A peace, a promise, a purpose, that was what the honor guard protected step by step, day after day. And even after the last visitor left, Walter knew the guard would still be there, as steady as sunrise, defending that silence against whatever storms the world might bring. Walter knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Visitors would come and go. There would always be voices that didn't understand, that couldn't grasp the weight of sacrifice until it was far too late. But for today, and maybe for tomorrow, and the day after, the honor guard had reminded everyone what true respect looked like. He watched the young Marine continue his precise march. Each step was deliberate, measured, unshakable. Each turn was executed with a crisp, powerful finality. There was no hesitation, no apology, no trace of the chaos that had tried to interrupt his duty. It made Walter's heart swell. Somewhere deep in the old man's mind, memories stirred of sand and smoke, of brothers who'd never come home, of folded flags handed to mothers with trembling hands. He thought of the way they had stood, even when afraid, even when the odds were stacked against them. They had held the line so future generations would have something worth protecting. That spirit lived on here in this young Marine, in every honor guard who had ever stood beneath the unforgiving sun or freezing rain, refusing to bow to anything less than respect. He looked around and saw other veterans standing a little taller now, their posture straightening as if remembering the old days. They were silent, but their eyes burned with the same pride. The teacher gathered her students, leading them slowly away. The kids glanced back again and again, wide-eyed and hushed, as if trying to burn the scene into memory. "Do you think he'll stay there all day?" one boy asked. The teacher nodded. "He'll stay as long as he's needed." A quiet awe crossed their young faces, the kind of understanding that might grow into something bigger, later the seed of gratitude. Walter wiped a tear away. He let his gaze drift over the sea of white headstones, each one a silent voice, each one a reminder. In the far distance, the woman who had caused so much pain was gone. The staff had removed her from these sacred grounds, and her anger had lost its audience. Walter almost pitied her in a way. He had seen pride destroy many men, but rarely had he seen it exposed so completely, so publicly. The lesson would follow her, he was sure. As the morning sun climbed higher, the marble began to glow blindingly white, almost radiant. It was as if the earth itself refused to allow even a shadow of shame to linger. The honor guard turned on his heel again, crisp and powerful. The breeze lifted the flag high behind him, a ripple of red, white, and blue against the summer sky. For a moment, Walter saw a line stretching through history, from the soldiers of Bunker Hill to Normandy to Vietnam, to those still fighting today, all connected by the single unbreakable thread of sacrifice. The young Marine was not alone. He was never alone. He carried them all in every step, in every breath, in every silent second he stood watch. Walter drew in a deep breath, letting the peace of this place settle into him. He tapped his cane once more, a small private salute to the men he'd lost, and turned to leave. As he limped away, he passed other visitors, arriving families with fresh flowers, teenagers in ROTC uniforms, an elderly widow clutching a folded flag. They too paused and watched the honor guard, their faces a mix of gratitude and grief. And as Walter reached the gate, he looked back one final time. The honor guard stood tall. The line still held. The silence was still safe. For as long as that young Marine kept walking, Walter knew no one would steal the dignity of the dead, no matter how loud or arrogant. It was a promise made every day, over and over, in boots on stone and hearts beating true. And that Walter thought was the legacy. A legacy that could not be humiliated. A legacy that could not be bought. A legacy that would never ever be broken. He squared his shoulders, took one last look at the white marble rows, and whispered so softly no one else could hear, "Sleep well, boys, you're still in good hands." Then he stepped out through the gate back into a world that would never fully understand what had been preserved here, but a world that could sleep in peace precisely because men like that honor guard would always stand the watch.